I grew up in New York City. I went to college in Buffalo. I'd never even been to California when I went to India. I look back and I think, how crazy was that? But there was something so potent about that moment. I wish I could bottle it, because
Mhm.
I look at that moment so often and I think, why didn't I just stay on the sidelines and think, maybe I'll do a paper on this. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll even go to graduate school and look at this. Or, it'd be interesting to do kind of comparative religion study. None of that. I thought, I have to learn how to do it. So what I was doing in that moment, without realizing it, I was taking myself from kind of the margins right into the center of possibility. I said, what about me? Could it help me? And that's not selfish. That's right.
Mhm.
And it changed my whole life.
Hey, y'all. My name is Jessie Johnson. This is the Success Sessions, and I am overwhelmed with gratitude and honor to have the incredible Sharon Salzberg with us today. Sharon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I feel like, Sharon, you almost don't need an introduction. You're such a big deal in the spiritual community. But I am, for anyone who doesn't fully know who you are, Sharon has been one of the most influential human beings in bringing meditation and mindfulness practices to the West. Sharon's been teaching meditation and mindfulness for almost 50 years. And like, she's one of like the originals, the OGs who like brought these teachings here. She co-founded Insight Meditation Center, which I literally only hear amazing things about this place and the practices that come out. And Sharon's written 11 books, some of which are New York Times bestsellers. Like, she's prolific, potent, powerful. I'm so humbled to get to speak with you today, Sharon.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
And I had the pleasure and privilege of really getting to know you and your mastery firsthand in February, just a few months ago when we met in Ojai, and immediately wanted to talk with you more. So here we are. Took us a
Isn't that
minute.
interesting? That was one of the last programs I did in person
Yes,
before the
same.
pandemic hit. It was really right on the edge of that time when.
Yeah, that's one of those things that, like, how could I have known that? I had no way of knowing that was going to be the last experience like that for some time. But now that's what it's become for me. It's not just
Yeah.
Mela, this very cool retreat. It's like this thing that happened and marked the passing of an age almost. Yeah, big deal. So I want to begin by asking you how you conceived of success when you were a child and how you were wrong.
Well, I had a very unsettled, one could say traumatic childhood with a lot of upheaval. My mother died when I was 9, and that's just one of many things that had happened for me. And so I think success in my mind meant security, and in the conventional ways, a house, steady, and anything steady, actually steady income, something I could rely on. And I was wrong. In part I was right, of course, but I was wrong because at this point in my life, all these years later, I know a lot of people who have all that stuff in place and they don't have an inner feeling of security or safety at all. So I had no concept that it could come from somewhere else. It needed to come from somewhere else.
And how did that change for you? What happened that had you learn the truth?
Well, I'm a product of the New York City public school system, which meant I skipped 2 grades, and I went to college when I was 16. And when I was a sophomore in college, I took an Asian philosophy course, which honestly, as far as I can tell, looking back, was kind of happenstance. It was sort of like, that fits in with my schedule nicely. Let me do that one, and the course just totally changed my life, because it was in the context of that course I heard that there were actual tools you could utilize, like direct practical tools called meditation, and that could help you be happier and have that kind of internal security, although I'm sure it wasn't phrased exactly that way. And I was going to school in Buffalo, New York, and this was 1970. And I looked around Buffalo and I did not see it anywhere. And the university had an independent study program where if you created a project that they approved of, you could go anywhere in the world, theoretically for a year. So I created a project that said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they said, okay. So off I went. And that's where I learned, of course, that there was really such a thing as an inner resource, an inner sense of security or sufficiency, and that you can actually access it and cultivate it.
You were you weren't even 20, it sounds like.
I was 18.
That's amazing. When you went to India for a year by yourself?
I went with a small group of friends, but I grew up in New York City, went to college in Buffalo. I'd never even been to California when I went to India. I look back and I think, how crazy was that? But there was something so potent about that moment. I wish I could bottle it, because I look at that moment so often and I think, why didn't I just stay on the sidelines and think, maybe I'll do a paper on this.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll even go to graduate school and look at this. Or, it'd be interesting to do kind of comparative religion study. None of that. I thought, I have to learn how to do it. So what I was doing in that moment, without realizing it, I was taking myself from kind of the margins right into the center of possibility. I said, what about me? Could it help me? And that's not selfish. That's right. And it changed my whole life.
This origin story feels so important to me, in part because I feel it's so clear to me that I'm going to cry. I have access to what I do, in part because you made that choice then.
Mm-hmm.
And just as you're saying, you could so easily have come up with something else to do with yourself.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to be boastful, but somebody once said to me, they were introducing me, and they said, she's one of the people who brought meditation over from the East. And then they said, I know you don't like people to say that. And I thought, well, why not? It's true. There are lots of things that I haven't done and will never do. And I know that, but that particular thing I did do with my life.
Yes. And can you tell us a little bit more? I want to know more about what that year was like in India and how you went from the clarity that you wanted to do this to the clarity that you wanted to bring this to other people.
It was a little bit more disrupted than that. First of all, I stayed longer than a year. Like many people, I wasn't rushing back to Buffalo actually to go back to school, although I stayed about a year and a half. I went back to school, did what I needed to do to get 2 years of independent study credit, and then I went back to India. So I really was looking for something very direct, very practical, not highly philosophical. I didn't want to become a Buddhist or change identities or reject anything else. And I found that. I found it in January of 1971, which is when I began my meditation practice. And then I went back to school. I came back to India. And then in 1974, I was leaving to come back to the States for what I was positive was going to be a very short trip, before I went back to India to spend the entire rest of my life in India. And I went to see one of my teachers, who was a woman named Deepa Ma. Deepa Ma is like a nickname for Deepa's mother. She lived in Calcutta, and she'd had a life as a younger woman of enormous suffering. She lost 2 children. She lost her husband. She was living in Burma at the time. She got into meditation because she was completely grief-stricken. And the doctor actually came to her house in Burma and said, you're going to die of a broken heart unless you learn to do something about your mind. You should learn how to meditate. And so she got up, she saw Deepa, her daughter, to raise. She got up, she got out of bed, she went to the monastery, and she learned how to meditate. And she emerged with just like this power of love and compassion. And she was a very, very important teacher for me. So I went to Calcutta to visit her to get her blessing for my very short trip back to the States. And she said, when you go back, you'll be teaching. And I said, no, I won't. And she said, yes, you will. And I said, no, I won't. It was ludicrous to me. And she said, yes, you will. I said, no, I won't. And then she said two things that were very important. She said, you really understand suffering. That's why you should teach. Mm. And I thought, first of all, coming from her, with the life she had had. And it was the first time I'd look back at sort of the turmoil and the pain in my childhood and think, oh, that gave me something also. Hmm. And then she said to me, you can do anything you want to do. It's your thinking you can't do it that's going to stop you. And I left her room, went down these 4 flights of stairs, and I kept thinking, no, I won't. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. And I came back to the States, and at some point thought I'd go visit my friend, Joseph Goldstein, whom I had met in India at my first retreat, who was in Boulder, Colorado. It was the first summer, the inaugural summer of Naropa Institute. So I went to visit him. Jack Cornfield was living down the hall, and Joseph stayed on for the second summer session to teach a course, and I stayed on with him. And then we were invited to teach a month-long retreat, and then we were invited to teach a 10-day retreat, and then we were invited to teach another 10-day retreat. And at one point I thought she was right. Mm-hmm. You know, so it was never like I had a vision of like, oh, let me bring it back, or, you know, this is my role in life. It just is what happened.
It's powerful as I hear you talk about it, because she had the vision.
Yeah, she had the vision.
She tried to give it to you, but you just were like,
no, I was too stuck.
I think this happens so often when it comes to spiritual life. There's so many stories like this of just kind of being taken by grace, taken in a direction that we couldn't have made up on our own, or even in this situation that you're describing, like someone shows it to us and we're still like, no, I don't see that.
No, I don't think so. And it sort of made it that much more interesting, I think, in the beginning, because what Joseph and Jack and I and a few other people, you know, together we were trying to do was something different. You know, almost every meditative tradition which had landed here by then was referring back to a single Asian teacher, very often a monk, and it was sort of that was the conduit, that was the, you know, the power of these centers, and we said we're a bunch of Westerners and we totally honor our teachers and the traditions and what we've been taught, but what does it look like here? Mm-hmm. Actually. And so we debated everything. When we bought this place, which is next door through the woods, the Insight Meditation Society, it was a Catholic novitiate, and it was run by the Fathers of the Blessed Sacrament. Mm-hmm. So that's what it said up above the doorway, Fathers of the Blessed Sacrament. And we bought it. We moved in. We got someone to get up on a very tall ladder and said, why don't you rearrange those letters so it says something about us? Huh. And they played around with the letters, and they came up with Metta, M-E-T-T-A, which means loving kindness. Uh-huh. In Pali, the language of the original Buddhist text. And then we had a big debate, because we debated everything. Should we have a word up? Nobody knows what it means. You know, we're in America now. Maybe we should take it down. But it's kind of a nice expression of what we are about, you know, and should we keep it? And finally, the point of view that wanted to stay up prevailed, which made me very happy, because that was my point of view. And I just like it, you know, like if someone calls for directions, or, you know, and whoever answers the phone says it's a large brick building with white pillars. It's got this word up above, metta. And I say, what does that mean? We say that means love, or that means loving kindness. And should we have Buddha statues around? You know, all of us had been taught by teachers who were very strong around the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. The Buddha taught a way of life. These are methods anyone can use. Anyone should feel welcome to use. Someone anchored in another faith tradition or no faith tradition. You know, it's about the power of the human mind, the potential power of the human mind, and one's ability to awaken it. So that would argue for maybe no Buddha statues, you know, like, but then, you know, we didn't make it up. Like I once was teaching, especially with loving kindness, because I've written so much about that particular approach. I was teaching somewhere and somebody said to me, this stuff is so amazing. When did you make it up? And I said, well, I didn't make anything up. And you are lucky that I didn't, like, it's not just like, oh, let me teach a workshop in something, like, and that argued for having Buddha statues, just as a symbol. Mm-hmm. And in the end, we had Buddha statues, but we always try to explain them and what they're about.
Like a reference to lineage or history.
Yeah, exactly.
And an acknowledgement of that. It is powerful, I think, to understand that these things that were becoming increasingly mainstream, these sort of spiritual technologies, are ancient also, mm-hmm. as they're, kind of the hip new trend, that they connect us to human roots that go back thousands of years. I love hearing you talk about it. My experience studying with you and learning from you is that there's trying to think what words to actually use to describe this. It's like the layers of your transmission are all lined up. They all say the same thing. The words that you're saying, the feeling that I have when I'm with you, something below even that surface that's energetic or something. It's like there's a level of consistency that mm-hmm. feels pervasive and very notable, very distinct from so much of what else is happening in the world. The image that I have is that you have become masterful at being aware of all these different levels of yourself, where most people maybe are only aware of one or two levels of themselves. So then the other levels are doing something totally unrelated.
Thank you. Well, that's part of being older, like I've been doing this for a long time. You're making me think of several books ago. I wrote a book called Real Happiness, which has, not that many books ago, but a few. It has a lot of guided meditations in it. And I was in a cafe in New York City. I was about to meet my agent and the editor of that book. They were taking me out to lunch. That was the book that was on the New York Times bestseller list. So they take me out to lunch to celebrate him. And the editor wrote me an email saying, oh, good news. We got a contract for an audio version. So I wrote back and I said, well, this is just a really busy time in my life. So maybe we better try to schedule a time when I can go in and read it. And she wrote back and said, you're not reading it. We're hiring an actress. And I wrote back and I said, well, how? I mean, it's not impossible, but you have to find an actress that has a very deep grounding in meditation. This is not like a novel. Right. Someone has to guide those meditations. And I think you can tell when someone is guiding a meditation and they've had, an hour and a half of experience. Yes. Or more, And so then she wrote to me again and she said, well, let me at least send you some voice samples from the actress. So she sent me these voice samples, but I was in this really noisy cafe. So I sent them to my assistant at the time, and she had a total meltdown. She said, I would return this in 30 seconds if it was not your voice, And so sent her to my agent, who's like an ally, and mm-hmm. she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to read it. Mm-hmm. So she said, okay. So then, when we actually went to lunch, and she said to the editor, she really wants to read it. And the editor was kind of like, oh, I'll see what I can do, and then I heard from them and they said, well, you can read it, but you have to come in early for special training. So I thought, okay, in my words, but that's all right. So I showed up very early for my special training, and the producer said, what are you doing here so early? And I said, I came for my special training. It's like special training to be me. And he said, what? So we had breakfast or something before I started reading it.
You didn't end up needing the special training?
I guess not, because I'd been teaching it for a very long time before I wrote it down,
Yeah. This is a few times you've said just in the last 20 minutes something that really you're like, yeah, but this is my work, or this is my piece. So yes, you can give me credit. Yes, I would like to be the one to read it. And I think I'd love to hear you speak about that, because feels so right to me. I feel like you're absolutely making the best decision for the world. And there's something that on the superficial level might sound, I don't know, self-centered, egotistical, somehow not spiritual. And I
Mhm.
know that it's not, but I'd love to hear you speak about how you make sense of that. How is it that you create the real estate for your this very human physical self
Yeah.
and not use it to sort of feed the unhealthy ego or whatever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's easy. It's easy, with enough mindfulness to sort of feel the line where, um, like when people say, she was the main person bringing loving kindness meditation as a Westerner, not as, there were plenty of Asian teachers, teaching beautifully, but people will often point to me and say, well, she was amongst the first at any rate, and certainly the first in my tradition, bringing loving kindness meditation to the States. And I think, well, it's true, like on the other hand, I can't lay claim to, conquering, world hunger or making for world peace or, I mean, I
Uh-huh.
can't.
Uh-huh.
And in terms of reading it, which is also, I have a book coming out September 1st. And given current conditions, we changed to the best of our ability my upstairs office to a studio,
Uh-huh.
which meant like no fan, no air conditioning. It was like stifling hot. And I was just stuck up there for 4 days reading it. And I thought, why? Why did I let an actress read this one? Um, and I don't think I'm not laying claim to having the most beautiful voice in the world or,
Mm.
anything like that. It's just because it was so many guided meditations, or even in this coming book, there are a fair number of guided meditations, and I just feel it's different.
Mhm.
When I've guided meditations for apps, for example, um, they've wanted me to give some instruction and then say, now we're going to meditate. And then a couple of minutes later, give some more instruction and say, now we're going to meditate. And I said, I don't really want to do that because I meditate as I'm doing it, and I only speak when I feel moved to speak again. And they said, well, people think the app is broken and they all write, or somebody write and say, well, there was this silence. It just like,
Uh-huh.
the app is not working.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, well, I'll say before we actually begin, when I become silent, that's the signal for you to put into practice what I've just suggested.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt like for me to do what they were asking, would not be having me come from an authentic place. The authentic place is when I'm practicing myself as well,
Yes.
and I'm communicating from that space.
You're modeling it, you're talking about it. I want to make it explicit. How do you conceive of success now?
I am so much older, so I've got all the wisdom of like growing old. Um, I think it's feeling integrated. I feel like to the best of my ability, I walk my talk, and when I don't, I feel the acute pain of that.
Mm.
I think if I was going to choose one word to describe myself at 16, 17, 18, before I went to India, I'd say fragmented. I
Mm.
was just really fragmented, and I don't feel that anymore. I feel like I know who I am, and I can, to the best of my ability, execute that. I mean, I had so many funny experiences just the other day reading the book.
Yeah.
I am a product of the New York City public school system. I know a lot of words I don't know how to pronounce, for one thing, I skipped 2 grades, so, and I think as a younger person, I would have been mortified, Now I just say,
Ah.
how do you say that? How do you say that word? I
Uh-huh.
don't know how to pronounce that.
Uh-huh. How does fame and celebrity and money play into your experience of mindfulness and or success? I don't know that that's actually a relevant data point, but for you, but for a lot of people it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I decided some years ago that what fame actually means is that more people know who you are than you know who they are. That's actually
Uh-huh.
what it means.
Oh, that's yes, I've never heard that before. That's
You
right.
know, and it's not necessarily that satisfying, you know, because um I mean, you don't really go to bed at night and think, 4,000 more people heard my name today and they know who I am, you know. It's like I don't live in that world or that consciousness. Like, um, I know I've been instrumental, that in a way I have a legacy and I'm very happy about it. I'm very proud of it, like the center and the books and things like that. But I don't think of myself as famous in any way, you know, and I know more people know who I am than I know who they are. I was, I've been once some friends and I were going to this Dalai Lama teaching in Los Angeles, and we went to some like random Mexican restaurant for lunch, and we were just talking, and someone at the other table heard my voice and looked over and said, "Are you Sharon Salzberg?" Because there were all those first cassettes and then CDs, and I said,
Mhm.
"Yeah." So that's a rush, but I don't find that ultimately anything. It's like
Mhm.
money is nice. I think money is good, and I live in a funny world too because like I'm one generation away from publishing being defined as you're in Burma or Thailand and your cousin dies, so you go to the monastery and you give him some money and you say, please print out 1,000 copies of this pamphlet to give away for free distribution in honor of my cousin's memory. That's what publishing meant.
Mhm.
And so um, it's a funny world. Like I read nowadays, that mindfulness is like a 70 gazillion dollar business or something like
Mhm.
that. And I think,
Mhm.
where's all that money? I think some people get into spiritual pursuit because they hate the world or they're afraid of the world, and
Mhm.
they don't understand that money can be a really good thing. Talk about security, like to have
Mhm.
enough. And then there's the other side, where the people who never feel they have enough, and it's just this kind of endless pursuit. And you think, really, well, now everything is so disrupted. I was talking to somebody today who runs a large organization and usually is traveling like 100 times a year or something like that, and he's not traveling at all.
Yeah.
And he said, I've never felt closer to my family.
Mm.
I've never felt as bonded, even with all the difficulties. So um I think enough money is a great thing, and I don't feel like it's wrong. On the other hand, you know my teachers never charged anything for instruction, and it would have been a really strange concept to them.
Mhm.
But again, it's like one generation away from all your needs are provided by the villagers or something, so
Right. I really
and we've had
appreciate
to
you
work it
talking
all
about
out,
this.
like how do you do it here?
Yeah. I actually don't think I mean I've heard tremendous critique and confusion in spiritual leadership about money, but I don't think I've heard the way that you speak about this translation. Like, this is the paradigm in India. How do we want to make it work here? What's going to serve people? What's going to reach people? What's going to
Mm-hmm.
sustain us as we do that?
Yeah, yeah. I
Very,
mean, it's
very
like,
powerful.
how do people, the people who think you should never have money, um, as a spiritual person or teacher, it's hard to say how, like how you survive, in this country. It's not the same country that, village Thailand is or something, where you go out with your begging bowl and you're like set, like,
Uh-huh.
I mean, we struggled, when we opened the center, which was 1976. First of all, I was a child, I was 23 years old. And it's like a real organization, and it's, a real building, and like
Yes.
sleeps 100 people, and it's got like a kitchen, and, we used to have these board meetings, and someone always said, well, you're not budgeting for depreciation. And one of us would say, what's depreciation? Like, I didn't know what a mortgage was, it was like, and suddenly I'm responsible for this entire operation with my colleagues, and the board. And we grew up fast, it was like, oh, we have to provide health insurance for the entire staff. Like, what happens if somebody gets sick? You can't do that in this country,
Mm-hmm.
And somebody more traditional would usually say, well, you just go to the community and you say, we have a need. And it's like, this is not Burma.
Yeah.
You can't just go to the community and like, they're struggling too,
Yeah.
You have to be responsible. So we opened up and we charged $6.50 a day. And somebody's father gave him a car. That's how we had a car.
Uh-huh.
And, we had nothing. It was really amazing,
Amazing to have nothing, or amazing that you were able to pull it off?
Amazing that we were able to pull it off.
Yeah. I agree. One of the things that I'm aware of, though, that I think it feels, I'm curious if this is true, it feels similar, is that you didn't necessarily go after money. You navigated each challenge as it surfaced. So it's not like you were completely checked out and avoiding money, but it's not like you were like, okay, we want to build this center that's going to have 100,000 followers and serve X number of people.
Not at all. Never. Even though we built another center in the back called the Forest Refuge. So we had to do fundraising for that. And we bought a property, which was like completely derelict. And I talk about this in my forthcoming book, where it was an old farmhouse, and we wanted to build a study center where people could look at some of the concepts, carefully, rather than just being immersed in the meditation. So we looked at this property, and I went down there with Joseph and his friend, Sarah, and they both had an ability to see what could be, which I did not have. And I just thought, oh, this place is falling apart, and I said to Joseph, please, let's not do it. And we did it. And it's beautiful. It's like this jewel, but I just couldn't see it. And so I talk about that in the book. Like, I can see it in people, actually. Like, sometimes I look at somebody who's not happy, and I really know that they will be very happy in a little while. But I couldn't look at the building and see what it could be. So, we have had fundraising efforts and things like that, but no, we never had a vision of success, honestly. Like, the whole first year, our mantra was, we can always close it in a year. Wow. Which, by the way, we could not get a bank to give us a mortgage. So 3 people had to go to the bank themselves and get loans, get personal loans so we could open up. So they were not very happy when we would say, oh, we can just close it in a year. And who knew? I mean, the science was not yet prominent in the research, and, it was a very different world.
Very different. When we met, you wore this sweatshirt. And I think I actually took a picture of us, like, with you in that sweatshirt. So it's had a big impact, the transmission of those hearts. And I feel like it is actually a wonderful representation of what you're doing, what you've done with your life. It's just like cover all these different parts of the world with love. Business, books, retreat centers, the negotiation around who will read the book out loud for Audible, whatever, like all of those things. And I've never had this language until today, but I think it's the right language for me also, and maybe most people, that like we are going from feeling our fragmentation to feeling our integration.
Mm-hmm.
And that it everything contributes to that. Our businesses contribute to that, and the way we relate to money contribute to that, and slash the other way around. Like we can bring our mindfulness practice to everything, every relationship, every experience, every interaction. And so I love every time I look at you that you're like, yep, that's what's happening here. I want to hear just a little like tidbit about this book so we can wet
The next book,
everybody's
my
whistle.
next book.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Real Change, and the subtitle is Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. So it's about mindfulness and loving kindness and social change. And I wrote every word of it, except for the brand new preface, before the pandemic came.
Wow.
But it's got a lot about finding agency, a sense of agency. It's got a lot about creativity, because I was talking to Bell Hooks, who's a kind of a feminist icon, and she said she didn't like the word social action because in her mind it was too limited. Like it sounded only like protesting. She said, "What about art?" And I thought, "Oh yeah, if you talk about something that will just dissolve our sense of limitation, think about art." So it's got a chapter on moving from anger to courage. It's got a chapter on moving from grief to resilience. But a friend of mine was reading it to create an excerpt for something. And he said the examples were just driving him crazy because he'd read it and think, that's what made you anxious? Wait till you see what's coming down the bike, So I went to the publisher and I asked if I could write a new preface, which they said, okay. So that is very contextualized, but it's really about inner practice and the outer manifestation.
Sharon, I'm so grateful for you on so many levels. I feel like I missed the memo for too long. I'm making up for it now, but like the Sharon Salzberg genius that I have been waiting for, I'm just like, I really feel like so much of what I'm doing in my life is because of you. And I didn't even know. It's because of your legacy. It's because of your level of integration and wisdom in these areas. And I'm just so grateful that you're in the world, so grateful that you're in my life, so grateful to learn from you.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you again.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm like, as soon as we're all traveling again, I'm coming for a visit.
Excellent.
Yeah. So people can find your book September 1st.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Real Change. And of course, all your other books are available now on all platforms that people read books. I'm going to just make the extra call that I feel like this is the time everyone that's watching this is meant to read that book. Let's all read it together. We'll start a book club.
Okay. Well, actually, I'll send you an email. We are starting book clubs.
Phenomenal. Perfect. Great minds.
Great.
And is there anything else that folks can do to help you or help your mission? People that are listening, what can we do to serve you?
Oh, you're so sweet. It really is just so nice to see you both, because it's a sign of a time gone by, like that really precious gathering. And it's just nice to see you and listen to you. So I think, I'm really encouraged by people undertaking a practice. And even in these very stressful times, there are massive numbers of new students who are listening to recordings or whatever. And the Insight Meditation Society, being closed, is moving to more and more online programs. So that would be a great thing to check out. I do a number of them. My colleague Joseph Goldstein and I are doing one together toward the end of October. And it's helping sustain the teachers and it's helping sustain the practice. So
I love that. We'll promote, announce anything that you guys are doing, because I actually, when I think about, my parents studied with Ram Dass. I went to Quaker meeting growing up. Like I had some kind of spiritual container that had me thinking that I knew what meditation was, even before I really did. When I got real serious about meditation, it's because I was teaching in New York City public schools. And literally within days, I was like, okay, I need something way more to support me than what I have in place. Because this is the hardest thing I've ever done, and I don't know how to survive. And that contrast, that struggle, that anxiety, that pressure, that emotional, I want to say like weight, is what drove me to begin a very serious meditation practice. And I think that this time of pandemic and global upheaval is the same opportunity for so many people to actually go deeper. And so Insight resources, everything that, I mean, it's so easy now to find these resources, but to choose to go in and invest more time to study and learn. And I will just say, again, I've been meditating for 15 years when I met you. And you taught things, much of which I had heard or thought about in one way or another. And yet it took me deeper, took me further. It was so nourishing. It was like just because you've watered a plant doesn't mean that you don't want to water it again. And that's what I felt like being in your container. So I can't recommend people that are listening enough. Please go study with Sharon virtually. It's so even easier now during the pandemic to do that.
It's true. And if you can send me an email telling me what the best email address for you is to send the invitation to form a book club.
Yes. Okay, great. We'll set it all up. We'll put all the links for everything that you do and the new book in the notes for this amazing interview. So make it real easy for people. And just Sharon, from the moon and back, like I am so filled with gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Everything